Welcome back to the Film Review Shack.
He's Daniel.
And he's Darian.
And we are so happy to have you here for our first episode.
We decided we want to kick this podcast off in a shocking fashion by delving in to the horror genre.
This week, we will be breaking down and reviewing two iconic 80s horror movies, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead.
Let's get into it. Our first film of the day will be Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. Released in 1981, The Evil Dead was Sam Raimi's directorial debut. This movie was shot over a 6-week period on a budget of approximately $375,000. It was met with mixed reviews due to its over-the-top blood and gore, but at the same time was praised for all of its achievements in independent filmmaking. Now, Darian and I, we went and saw this movie in classic fashion at the Mayfair Theatre in Ottawa. Darian, what did you think of our experience?
You know, it felt like a real honor to go see it in theater. Of course, we weren't around in 1981, so this is a great opportunity that we had to jump on when it presented itself.
For sure, it was very special. Great atmosphere. It's so much better to watch a movie in the theater than at home on your TV or on your laptop.
Absolutely.
The story in this movie, it gets, kind of bland for me a little bit at times, but I think overall it's pretty good. It follows a lot of tropes and such, and it's like a classic horror setup. What do you think?
I would have to agree. I think right from the beginning, the first shot, it follows your very typical horror setup. You know there's this something that's after them. You see them driving in the car, and you see it affect them in the first scene, takes over the wheel. But after that first scene, I think that's where Sam Raimi decided to let everything else take over. After the first shot of the movie, when you see your typical horror story setup, you really see Sam Raimi let the blood and the gore take over. And that's where the film just follows the whole way through. The one thing I like about The Evil Dead is the pace that Sam Raimi chose to put for it throughout the whole movie. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that starts so rapid fast as his. Like the first shot is they're driving in the car and you've already got this thing that's coming after them within seconds. And then the next big event, which I'm not going to go into detail about, but if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about, is that scene with that woman in the woods. And when that scene was played, I think everyone was shocked at how vicious this could be. Like it was portrayed so well for something so nasty, and something that gave the audience a feel of how extreme this could be. And it really set the tone for the movie early on.
Yeah, I think it's quite a choice to have that as the first instance where we really get to see this supernatural force. It's such a vicious scene, but done in a classy way in a sense. Like they're not too graphic with it because it is such a dramatic scene that if they were to be as graphic as they were with the other gory scenes, it would be a little too far. But as you're saying, sets the tone incredibly well. Like, if this is the first time we're seeing this force, what's going to happen after this? Where do we go from here? How does it get even more intense than that? And I think it does. It does a great job of setting it up, but also not giving you everything right away.
Right. It just makes you feel instantly that there's absolutely no limits to this thing whatsoever.
Yeah, it's perfect setup for an equally crazy movie. It's great blood and gore too.
Absolutely. The effects were really outstanding.
Yeah. Speaking of those special effects a little bit, I thought they did a really great job with art and makeup, and they did a really great job at making those demons look realistic. And it didn't seem too cheesy or anything like that. I don't know what you thought of it, but I thought it all was pretty believable for me.
Absolutely. I'd have to agree. And with the scenario that they put themselves in is where you're seeing the friends of the obviously remaining survivors, I guess you could call them, being taken over by these demons. And it really crosses the line well where it still looks exactly like the friends, but you've got these effects that are like completely taking them over, and it looks totally believable on these people.
100%. I think part of the reason that works so well is the whole aesthetic of the movie matches. There's not a part of it where it's so realistic and then other parts that are so unrealistic. They all stick to the same amount of realism. So it really helps you believe in the movie because it doesn't make any leaps in the quality.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think when you watch a film where it reaches those points of high and low, how believable it is, I think it kind of takes the audience away from the film. Whereas with Evil Dead, it follows the same path, follows the same trail for the whole movie, and it really brings you in, pulls you in, and makes you invested in the movie.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing that kind of hits the low is when they are disintegrating at the end. But how can you blame them? That's quite an impressive scene to pull off.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. With it being special effects, I think it really did give it a big climatic ending, though. I think in every horror movie you're going to watch, there's always going to be some big twist at the end. For being what Evil Dead was, I think that was a spectacular way to end it with those effects.
Yeah, it's very impressive for the budget that they had, the materials and resources that they had as well.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of the great first examples of when makeup and effects really started to come into play. You had a lot of films around that era, but I think Evil Dead was very crucial to the whole movement of that time.
Yeah, really you can see how the effects in that movie carry over as we come further down in history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing that really makes this movie work is the cinematography. I think it was awesome. Part of the reason is the aspect ratio, like 4:3 square aspect ratio. I'm a sucker for it. I think it makes every shot look better. But just in general, lots of great handheld shots, lots of great use of close-ups. What did you think?
Yeah, I really enjoy the way they did that. Obviously, the story being friends going to a cabin for a vacation, and it almost gives it the feel, almost like a found footage kind of film, because you've got the camera work that you wouldn't see in most movies. Like, it's very student filmish.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're watching something that will be found at the cabin that's happening to all these people within the story. And I love the way that the camera angles and everything they use the whole way throughout the film that adds this effect to it.
Yeah. Yeah, like you're saying, it's kind of a student feel. Like, there's not a lot of coverage in this movie. It's a lot of just one angle, and that's the scene. And then maybe we'll cut to a couple different angles, but it's not cutting back and forth between, a over the shoulder or something like that, what you might see in a rom-com or something.
Right, exactly.
This movie also does really great use of POV shots, which is quintessential for the horror genre. And I think this movie really kind of puts that as a staple in the genre.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I actually have an example of one certain point in the movie that the camera angle really helped. And it's a sequence where Ash's friend Scott has gone down to the basement to check out what made that loud noise, what opened the cellar door. And it's a point of view shot where it starts at Ash's feet, and you see him going down the stairs, and then the camera pans up, and you see the terror in him, and that starts to pass itself off to the audience. And then you do a full 360, really slow camera pan around the room, waiting for something to jump out. As the audience, you're on the edge of your seat, you're just waiting for it. And it goes all the way back around, comes back to his face, and then doesn't his friend come into frame and make the jump scare right where the camera is instead of having the camera move to it.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive shot. It really builds that suspense, and a lot of the shots in this movie do that as well.
Yeah, and I think also with that one in particular is once that camera does the full 360 and you land back on his face, you were on edge, and then I think you think everything's going to be okay, and that's when he puts the jump scare in and it hits you.
Lots of the jump scares in this movie are like that, where you kind of have the suspense built, but then you have the relief, and then the jump scare.
Right.
The jump scare comes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very interesting directing choice.
It is. I think it helped make the movie better by these jump scares.
Yeah, it made them much more effective. You couldn't feel them coming, in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah. And another thing I think this movie does really well is its use of Dutch angles. It's a lot of tilted shots. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And of course, one of the rules in filmmaking being when something's off, you make the camera angle a little bit tilted. That's a fairly common rule. And I think that absolutely sets the atmosphere for what's going on in this film and some of the angles they chose to use at certain points.
Yeah. Yeah, the cinematography really matches well with the atmosphere, and it helps develop and solidify that atmosphere as well. Speaking of the atmosphere, another part of this movie that really helps add to that is the sound effects and music. I find this movie does a great job of using that high-pitched bow shriek. It's a quintessential horror film sound effect, but this one, it puts it in perfectly. And then combining that with the music, it all works out very well.
Absolutely. Even right from the opening scene, you've got that score that kicks in, and it just instantly pulls you in.
Mm-hmm.
And constantly throughout the film, just like the cinematography, the score kicks in at exact right moments, makes the audience feel what it needs to feel while this is happening on screen. And excellent way the whole throughout.
Mm-hmm. I really liked how there was a couple moments where the music didn't match what was going on screen. Like, it was a major sounding music, but then it was kind of creepy what was going on. And that actually had the effect that you wanted, making it feel even more eerie and making you feel even more unsettled, because what you're seeing and what you're hearing wasn't exactly what you were expecting.
Right, and I think also sometimes with the music that kicked in, if it wasn't creepy music opposed to being creepy on the screen, it almost set in this realization that this is constant for the characters in this scene. So it's it's becoming a part of what they're getting used to. The music is normal-ish. It's not out there, but the severity of what's happening on screen is. And as an audience, it doesn't feel right, but it gives you that realization.
Yeah. Makes you feel like, why am I feeling calm here when what's about to happen?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so I would say overall, I really enjoyed this movie. Do you have a ranking or anything that you want to?
Yeah, if I were to give this movie a rating on the 10-star scale, I think I'd have to give it a 7.3.
7.3. I like that rating. I very much similar. I gave this movie an 8 out of 10, but I really enjoyed the experience that we had going to the theater and getting to see it. So for the whole experience, I'm actually going to bump this up to a 9 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's quite the leap, especially on the first episode, to have a 9 out of 10, but I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was top to bottom very well done, especially for an independent film. And the experience was bar none one of the best movie experiences I've had.
I'd have to agree. I just think, as someone who's grown up watching a lot of horror as well, I think I've seen the bar set at different levels for different films. And I think there is a lot of ways they could have improved, but for what it was, I really enjoyed, and I stand with my 7.3.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like that rating.
All right. Well, that was us reviewing The Evil Dead. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to review The Shining.
But first, before we get to The Shining, we've got a draft. Top 5 horror movies of all time. Darian and I will go back and forth, each giving a movie till we both get to our top 5. No repeating, so may the best man win. Darian, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Alrighty.
All right, first pick in my draft, I'm going to take The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Ooh, that's a classic. I like that pick. All right, I'm going to go with one of our movies from today. I'm going to go with The Shining at number 1.
Number 2, I'm going to take Halloween.
Ooh, it's a good one. I didn't have that one on my list, so thank goodness.
Yeah.
At my number 2, I'm going to take my favorite horror movie. It's kind of a thriller, but I think it's pretty scary. I'm going to go with the original Alien.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, Ridley Scott.
At number 3, I'm going to take Jordan Peele's Get Out.
It's a classic. I had that one on my list. I'm a little bummed that you took it, but, you kind of needed it. Well, since it's still on the board, I might as well take The Evil Dead.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know how I got both our movies this week.
Well, I'll be honest, Evil Dead wasn't in my top 5.
I haven't seen as many horror movies as you, so.
At number 4, I'm going to take The Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, man, I was just about to take that. Good pick. All right, well, I'm going to have to go a little out of left field here. I'm going to go with Split.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Kind of like a superhero horror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Number 5, I'm going to go with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
That's good. Alfred Hitchcock, classic horror director. I was thinking about going with The Birds, number 5, another Alfred Hitchcock movie. But I'm going to go with one a little closer to home for me. The first horror movie I ever saw when I was 9 years old in the theater, don't know how I got in, Resident Evil Afterlife. Terrible movie, but it's got sentimental value to me. Well, that's the draft. Let us know what you think. Who won, Darian or Daniel?
Okay, we are now going to talk about our next movie, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Released in 1980, this was Stanley Kubrick's third last movie. He shot this movie for over a year in London, England, with a budget of $19 million. In total, Stanley Kubrick worked on this movie for 5 years from start to finish. Although not a blockbuster movie at the time, The Shining is now known as one of the best horror movies of all time. Well, you want to start us off?
I would love to. Let's get into the story, because this is a crazy story. The first thing that I really noticed about this story is there's a ton of foreshadowing. It's almost that they tell you everything that's going to happen in this movie and then just let it scare you, even though you know it's coming. It's quite impressive how much foreshadowing is in this movie, yet how surprising everything still ends up being.
Absolutely. Even from the beginning of the movie in that job interview, when Jack Nicholson is looking to get hired for this job and they let him know at the end of the interview, did you get warned about the incident that happened in 1970? And then explaining a guy in isolation got cabin fever and ended up taking out his family. Mm-hmm. And then as the audience, you really get invested in, well, Jack's not going to do that. You're watching the movie and you're seeing this pretty calm guy. You see how he is with the family from the beginning, and you see this pretty calm guy and you just think that's not going to happen. And then that makes it so much more severe when it does finally come around to that point in the movie.
Yeah, for sure. A good balance of telling you what's going to happen, but also subverting your expectations. Another thing I thought that was interesting in this story is how it paces itself, how the timeline goes. We start off, we have the interview, and then we go to a point in time a month later. The closing day first, and then a month later. And then we go to individual days spread 2 days apart. And then we go to hours within a day. Everything gets shorter and shorter time frame as it goes along.
Yeah, and I think what's so important about that in this film is it's almost like watching a documentary on what would be happening with the events of these characters. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, it starts off a lot slower and gets rapidly faster. And that's the effect that this mental illness takes on Jack Nicholson. It takes a little while to ease in. Mm-hmm. And then once it hits a certain point, it's just skyrocket.
Yeah.
And the drama builds up, gets more climatic, and it all unravels in front of you.
Yeah, and the way that they separate the different times kind of separates the acts as well. Like you have the first act is these bigger time jumps, and then the second act starts as soon as we end up, I think it's Tuesday or something like that, or Thursday maybe. And that first scene right after that title, Jack starts losing it. And you can see wheels start to come apart, and I believe that's a scene where Wendy comes into his writing room and Jack just for no reason just loses it on her, and like very, very visceral and very cold, and it's their first sign that this guy is starting to turn.
Absolutely. When you break it down to the 3-act structure, it was definitely a clever way to make it work with the content of the film as well as keep your very typical film structure.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of this ending? It's something, isn't it?
It definitely is something. I think it's pretty hard to think about and hard to make understand. Stanley Kubrick drops very subtle hints throughout the film, like when he's in the bathroom with the guy and he's describing, well, you've always been the caretaker here. And then, of course, you see that shot at the end where it starts at the end of the room and it pans in slowly to that picture on the wall, and it keeps zooming in one by one to get closer to Jack Nicholson's face. And for me, I didn't fully understand. I don't think I drew anything together what that entirely means. What about you?
Interesting that you say that. I found it kind of all wrapped everything together. You've got, it's 1921, that is when the picture's from, and the ballroom, whenever he goes into it, it's like it's straight out of the Roaring Twenties. So it kind of doesn't make sense when you're first watching it, but then when you gets revealed that he's from the 20s, it all kind of makes sense that, okay, he's just a part of this hotel and he's been around it forever. And that's why everything that's these hallucinations, or what might be hallucinations, are set back in the 20s. I don't know if you picked up on that.
I did a little bit, but I think there's a couple things that don't make it consistent for me. Of course, you see Jack with his family outside the hotel, and there's all of that. But then, of course, there's the other man, Mr. McGrady, and the story of his daughters and wife being murdered, and they're luring around the hotel. So to me, that doesn't fully makes sense when you see all of them as well. And Jack Nicholson ties into that. I don't know how that flows.
Yeah, there's a little bit of inconsistency between how Jack and the rest of his family relate. Like if Jack's always been there, what is Wendy and Danny? Are they also ghosts, or are they people that have been lured by a ghost that is Jack, that's sent out by the hotel?
Right, and I think it's one of those moments in a Stanley Kubrick movie where it's left up to the audience. A lot of it is left up for you to figure out, similar to his films like Space Odyssey and things like that. I just think it leaves a lot of questions unanswered.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing is that that's not the way the movie originally ended. The original ending for the movie was very much more clear. Danny and Wendy escaped, they go to the police, and the police come back and say they have no way, or they didn't find any sign that any of what they said took place. Like that they were lying and nothing happened. There was nothing at the Outlook Hotel, no body, no sign of Jack, no sign of any of the massacre that went on. And then it just ends with a blank title screen saying, and the Overlook Hotel remains open and closes during the winters.
Wow, yeah. And on top of that, too, of course, Stanley Kubrick changing the original version from the book, too. I think a lot of it comes down to his vision and what he wanted the movie to be. And that's something that I always struggle with figuring out his movies.
Yeah, he's a very mysterious guy when it comes to his endings.
Yes.
He likes to leave it up to interpretation. Another thing that's really special about this movie is the acting in it. Jack Nicholson, obviously, iconic actor, iconic role. He's known around the world for this role. What did you think of Jack's acting in this?
I think just like every other thing that he does, it was pretty phenomenal. I think he nailed it as far as the drastic measure the character took as everything's taking over him. I think he, funnily enough, portrays that deranged character very well. And we've seen it time and time again, and this is no exception.
Yeah, it really reminds me of other roles that he's played, like in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and also as Joker in the Batman. Those facial expressions that he uses in that movie are very similar, and it's just such a testament to his ability. It's like him and Jim Carrey have these incredible facial expressions.
The one thing I will say about the performance of Jack, and maybe this is Stanley Kubrick's direction as well, is I think at the beginning of the movie there needed to be a little bit more of a happy family guy from Jack Nicholson, because right from the get-go, you hear about this story of Jack being drunk, accidentally injured Danny. And I think if you had flipped the dynamic and he was a totally nice guy in the beginning, not saying that he necessarily wasn't, but you would really see the change in him throughout the movie. Whereas you see that first scene in the car where they're driving up to the hotel, and he already like acts a little bit off, and you kind of draw together at the end, maybe he was like this all along, like you said before. Whereas I think if it were to fit the whole movie structure, he should have had him be a really nice guy, and then act 2 hits, and then the total 360 flip.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in the first act, they lead on a little too much that he is deranged. You can kind of tell, and especially the way that the cinematography is in that first act, it makes it feel eerie, and it makes it feel like there's something wrong with this guy. It's not a happy family man.
Exactly.
The other lead actor in this movie, Shelley Duvall, didn't have very much praise when this movie came out, actually being nominated for Worst Acting Award. I thought she did a great job. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time I watch this movie, I think she acts really well to what the situation at hand is. We can talk about that scene where she's going up the stairs with the bat, for example. I think it's the one very climatic scene where Jack has fully turned, starting to attack her, and I think her acting of terrified in that movie is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think she does a really good job of capturing a person that's stuck between these two incredible things that are happening. Like her husband is becoming deranged and her son is being overtaken by some kind of force within the hotel, and she is just caught in between it, not really knowing what's going on. And I can really feel the fear that she had. I think she portrays it perfectly. Maybe there's some little things left up that you might want, like her crying wasn't super great, but how many takes did they do of that stairway scene? 127.
Yeah.
At some point, you're going to run out of tears. It just depends on what take Kubrick decides to use.
Right.
Well, I think overall, she did a great job, and I think it was well warranted that just a few years ago, they took away her nomination for Worst Actress.
Absolutely.
And of course, you got the little kid, Danny, played by Danny Lloyd. I think he does a great job. I mean, he's a child actor. Child acting is tough, but he does a pretty good job, and you can tell that Kubrick gave him some good direction.
Absolutely. I think, and a lot of the time with child actors, it's not typical you see him in a film like this. I think it was really shocking to have his performance weigh so heavily in a film with nature like this. And I think he did such a great job at portraying what was taking over him, even though there's really no explanation of what's taking over him. The way you see the red rum in the mirror, for example, and when he comes up to Wendy and you see it clearly taking him over, I think with no understanding of what this is that's got a hold on him. I think it's a really great performance.
Yeah, it's shocking. Like, how old is this kid? And he's putting on a performance that is meant for people over 20 years old. It's quite a level of maturity that it takes. And I think he absolutely nails it. Like that scene in the third act when he is going up to Wendy and Tony is completely taking him over. It's really creepy and it's really scary. And it's just very impressive that a child is able to capture such gravitas.
Absolutely, and I think it's so much more scary coming from a kid perspective. I think the fact that this entity, or whatever it may be, has taken over the body of a young kid just adds the fear level of, oh, what is this going to do?
Yeah, for sure.
So to go back on the cinematography a little bit, what did you think of it, even from that first shot?
Oh my goodness, man. I loved it from the very first shot. Those helicopter shots to start off the movie were awesome. There's some really intricate shots where they come right up close to the beetle as it's driving along, and like they're flying that helicopter a couple feet over the road. Like that's so difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think that establishing shot with that score really just gave the cabin fever almost feel of it, because the shot is so remote. Like there's really nothing around. You got the hills, and that score just sets the tone perfectly.
Yeah. Overall, the cinematography in this movie, I think it's tremendous. I see as this movie has like 3 main shots that it uses. It's got lots of Steadicam shots, and it also does a great use of medium close-up shots, and like clean ones too, where it's just the actor that's speaking. And as well, really great use of zoom lenses in this. There's a great distinction between when they're using the Steadicam and when they're using zoom lenses, and that difference makes it feel very off-putting because they're very similar looking shots, but you can just tell that there's something different about it. It gives it this really weird feel.
Absolutely. I think throughout the whole film, Stanley Kubrick nailed it from every perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall the film wasn't too scary in nature for me compared to some things that I have seen, but I think his camera work and his direction really gave a lot more to it in terms of that.
Yeah, I found the camera work was the scariest part for me, especially all the Steadicam shots where you're just kind of lingering around. It feels like you're just there watching it happen, like you're a fly on the wall or something like that.
Absolutely.
And then as well, that use of medium close-ups is so terrifying for me. It's this intense emotion, and it's all just about that. You know, you don't have someone else's shoulder or whatever. It's just all about the emotion, and it's raw, and it really highlights the expressions that the actors are giving.
Oh, definitely.
Another thing this movie does is it breaks the 180 rule a lot. I know this movie, it's been praised for the bathroom scene where they break the 180 rule and how effective that is. And they also do it a couple other times earlier in the movie when they're getting the tour and they go in and out of the freezer and pantry. I don't know if you noticed, but when they come out, they break the 180 rule and it seems like you're in a totally different place. Like you totally lose your perception of where you are in the hotel.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And like we talked about earlier, being from a point of view shot or even like a fly on the wall, it just adds the intensity of if you were there in that room, everything going down from more than one point of view.
And it kind of makes you feel lost in a sense. Like it makes it difficult for you to get a grasp on where the actors are, and that makes it more suspenseful because you don't know where they're going. Like when they're running around in the third act and Jack is chasing Wendy, because of how different each shot is and you're following along, it's difficult to tell where he's going and what part of the hotel he's in. I also really enjoyed the lighting in this movie. It's a horror movie with high key lighting. So everything is really well lit in this movie, except for maybe a little bit in the third act. It gets into some more low key lighting because it becomes nighttime. But most of this movie takes place during the day. And I really found resonate that first shot or the first scene in the third act, the staircase scene, where you have these giant windows, all this light coming in. You can see exactly what's going on in full detail. And Jack Nicholson is framed up with the windows behind him, giving him this great rim lighting and almost an angelic look, which is totally opposite of what his character is doing. And it adds a very eerie feeling to the film because it's not what you expect. It doesn't match with the intensity and the horror that's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely quite an interesting contrast that's added to the film from that perspective.
Another thing this movie has been praised for is its sound design and its music. The iconic scene of Danny on his little big wheel and he's rolling over the carpet and hardwood, and you get that silence and then deafening blare of the hardwood and then silence again. And it goes back and forth. And throughout the movie, there's many examples of where it uses great sound design. I really like its use of the high shrieking strings, but then this movie also combines it with a low roll and timpani. So you get that high pitched and this low vibration, which makes it feel even more dark and scary.
Absolutely, and I'm going to go back to that scene with Danny riding around. I think in a lot of films you can see that individuals try and make it easier in that scenario, whereas maybe the whole floor is all rug, maybe it's all hardwood, but I think that Stanley Kubrick keeps it so consistent to what the hotel would be, and just the absolute perfect timing of the sound matching the screen, the bike going over the rug, the bike going over the floor, was absolutely phenomenal in that. And to chime in as well, the score playing in those certain parts was just so critical.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single point in this movie where the sound design or the score is just there to be there. Every part of the sound has a meaning and it has a use, and I think it's just a phenomenal job of creating suspense through sound.
Absolutely, it serves the purpose and it hits it right head on.
But speaking of how much detail they have in the sound, the art and the set design, that's an incredible attention to detail. This hotel is immaculate. All of the patterns, everything, they all line up. It's very good, and I really like how there's different rooms with different themes, and each scene kind of gets their own feel because of these different set designs.
Absolutely, and always with a Stanley Kubrick movie, you've got phenomenal production design, especially in The Shining particular. I think I was so glad to have him be doing it because it really gave it so much with that beautiful hotel.
Yeah, it's interesting. When they shot this movie, he actually had each part of the hotel built at the same time so he could shoot it chronologically and actually go through the hotel shooting all these different scenes. And they had 4 gigantic sound stages in London where they had this hotel built, and they actually had some of the exterior shots filmed in the studio on the soundstage. They had a life-size version of the hotel built in studio.
Wow, just wow.
Yeah, he goes pretty over the top for most of his movies, but it pays off.
Oh, definitely. Time and time again, we've seen it pay off.
Yeah. Now, one way this movie differs from our other movie, The Evil Dead, is there's not nearly as much blood and gore, but where it is used is very impressive. Of course, the elevator scene, I love it. I'm a big fan of blood and gore. Love Tarantino, and having that motif of that scene throughout the movie and then finally paying off with the full scene in the end. I think that's a great use of blood to create horror.
Absolutely, for that scene. And I'm going to go back to what you talked about earlier regarding foreshadowing, because you've actually got that blood coming out of the elevator twice in that movie. The first time when Danny's riding around, he sees it in his head. And then, of course, later, Wendy sees it as well. And another comparison between these two films here is, I think they're almost polar opposites in some degree, because you've got Evil Dead where it's low budget, you've got Sam Raimi in his directorial debut, and this camera work in that film also makes it scary, the way that he uses the handheld camera and all the shots like that. And then you've got complete opposite with The Shining, you've got Stanley Kubrick and this amazing production design, and what he does for that film makes it terrifying as well. And just 2 examples on 2 totally different scales.
Yeah, it really shows how you can create horror in totally drastic different ways and still have the same outcome.
Absolutely. Was there any scene in this movie that really stood out to you?
There was. I really, really love the scene when Jack gets locked in the pantry and he's having this conversation with Wendy through the door, and you have this really cool low angle shot of Jack Nicholson, and it just stays on him. It doesn't cut back to Wendy. It's just Jack Nicholson looking up at his chin, and he's just breaking down. He is trapped, but he is desperate, and I really like how it's shot, the editing choice in it, and the acting as well.
Absolutely. It was an incredible scene, and when you see that camera tilted up at him and he's trying all these different things, saying all these different words, it's almost like you're in that room with him, and it brings you to think of what would you do in this scenario, how would you get out? As much as he shouldn't be getting out.
Yeah.
It makes you think it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I was watching it. I was like, is he going to get out? Like, there's the handle there. I was thinking, well, maybe he's going to jam this handle and break the handle from the inside. But then he ends up getting out some mysterious way. The hotel lets him out, I guess, is how it ends up.
Right, and I think if you were to cut back and forth between Jack and Wendy, I think you lose the engagement in that moment, if that were the direction they were to take.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of points in this movie where they do that exact same thing, where you have the camera on somebody, they give their line, and then it stays on them for the reaction. I think great examples in the interview at the start. There's a lot of times where Jack is just having his reactions on screen, and it's just the camera stays on him and he gives his response and then has his reaction to whatever Stuart Ullman is saying.
Right, and that's such a great choice made by Kubrick in this movie and all of his movies, of course, is it helps the audience engage with the characters so much more too. Give the interview, for example, if you were to cut back and forth constantly between the two, you wouldn't know as much about Jack as you did. You see all of his facial reactions as Stuart is saying all this, and Stuart's not a recurring character, so Stanley Kubrick recognizes this and gives you more of Jack, and that's exactly what the audience needs.
Yeah, great choice on when to cut back and forth and when not to cut back and forth. Well, Darian, I think we've broken it all down, and I think it's time for us to give a ranking.
All right, you want to go first?
I would love to go first. You're probably going to get upset at me because I'm giving this another high ranking. I wanted to give it a 10, but I held myself back. I'm giving this a 9.5. I think it's an absolutely incredible film, top to bottom, production value, incredible cinematography, incredible directing, acting, everything. I just can't quite give it a 10 because I don't think it's a perfect movie. I think there's a few things left to desire, but Stanley Kubrick knows how to make a movie, and in terms of pure art, it's got to be up there in top 100 movies all time at least.
I'd agree. Everything all around is absolutely phenomenal. They nail it head on. My rating scale is always a little lower than yours, so with this movie I'd have to go with an 8.5.
Nice. I like that rating. That's probably more of where I should be, but I'm a bit of a sucker for Kubrick, so.
Fair enough. So that was us reviewing The Shining. We are now going to move on to a blind ranking, and I'm going to kick it off by doing a blind ranking for Daniel of Jack Nicholson movies. You ready?
I am ready.
All right, I'm going to start this off with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's a great movie. I studied that movie in high school. Jack Nicholson does a great job. I'm going to put that one at 3.
3, really?
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of good movies, and I want to leave some room up top for maybe some better ones.
Okay, we'll go with The Bucket List.
Oh, The Bucket List, he does a good job. I really enjoyed that movie. I'm going to have to put it at 4, though.
4? All right.
I don't think he's the best actor in that movie.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go with Batman.
Oh, I think he does a really good job in Batman. I think he rivals Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight. So I'm actually going to put this one at 2.
Number 2. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm confident in that. I think, maybe not everyone would agree, but I think he gives a better performance in Batman than One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay.
It's a bit of a hot take.
Okay, let's go with The Shining.
Oh.
1 or 5?
1 or 5. Now, it all depends on what you give me last, but I can't, in my right state of mind, put this one below The Bucket List. So I'm going to have to go number 1.
All right. And last one, I'll go with The Departed.
Oh, man. Can I put that at 0.5? Okay, I guess that's going to have to just go at 5. That's a great movie. I really love The Departed. Probably would have put it up there at 4. But that's the way the blind ranking goes.
That's right.
All right, now to flip it right back around to you, Darren, I'm going to give you a blind ranking on Stanley Kubrick movies.
All right.
Number 1, we'll start off with a heavy hitter, 2001, A Space Odyssey.
I think you're going to disagree with me on this one, but I think I'm going to put it middle of the pack, start with it at number 3.
That's fair. I do disagree. It's my favorite movie of all time, so.
I think it's absolutely phenomenal with the visual effects and everything, but I think there's films of his that are more enjoyable to watch.
Hey, it's your ranking, not mine. All right, well, let's go with one of his earlier films then, The Killing.
The Killing, I'm going to have to go with number 4.
Okay, leaving room down below for number 5.
That's right.
Well, I gotta give you The Shining then.
The Shining, I'm going to have to go with number 1. I can't think of any in my head that are more enjoyable than that, and so I'm going to go number 1.
That's fair. All right, you've got number 2 and number 5 available. I'm going to give you A Clockwork Orange.
I'm going to have to put that one at number 5. I wouldn't normally, but under the circumstances, I think, again, there's a lot more that are a little more enjoyable, and it is a really tough watch.
Pretty brutal movie.
Absolutely.
So I'll give you something that little easier to watch, Full Metal Jacket.
Perfect. I'm happy with that at number 2.
All right. I think that's a good list. I might have put 2001: A Space Odyssey at 2, but you know what? It's your list. I respect it.
Well, that wraps things up for today. Thanks for tuning in.
Come back every week for a new episode of the Film Review Shack.
Signing out.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Darian.
And we are
the Film Review Shack.